Welcome to another episode of Grow Beyond Grades, streaming live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and in the Grow Beyond Grades Facebook group. The goal of Grow Beyond Grades is to provide opportunities for educators to connect, share ideas, and support each other on the journey toward more effective and humane assessment practices, particularly those that provide viable alternatives to the culture of grading and testing in schools. If you're joining us live, we encourage you to engage in the conversation by sharing your questions and comments. Let's get started as we explore more ways to grow beyond grades.
All right, welcome to another episode of GBG Live. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Dave Franjosa.
And I'm Michelle Cottrell-Williams.
All right, so Michelle, tonight we have, he's become a friend of mine. I started using this product a couple of years ago, and I've given him a lot of feedback, and we've talked quite a bit. And I know you're not in the classroom anymore, so you might have a few more questions than I do, so feel free to hop in with those.
Awesome. Yeah.
Whenever. Another cool thing is this person has been one of our sponsors. So I want to take this moment to thank all of our sponsors, everybody who donates on Patreon. That's how we can continue to bring this content to everybody and hopefully expand our offerings. So thank you to all of our sponsors. We do appreciate it. So without any further ado, let's bring on Mike Rutherford. He is the founder and CEO of gotLearning, Got Feedback. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, David. It's great to be here. I appreciate having me on here on what is on the East Coast, a very exciting night for lots of students who are possibly getting a snow day tomorrow.
That's right. My own kids here in Northern Virginia have already gotten tomorrow called off. So
here in Philadelphia, the majority of schools are, even though it hasn't started snowing yet, they've decided that it's going to snow. So
it will.
Yeah, here I'm in Northern Jersey. We haven't gotten anything yet. So feeling a little left out, but that's all right. So Mike, thank you for joining us. Yeah, I know your story quite a bit. We've talked at length about a lot of what we're going to go into tonight. And I think your perspective is kind of interesting. So I'm not going to steal your thunder. I know that you are definitely a proponent of gradeless and alternate approaches to education. So why don't you kind of share with the audience where that perspective comes from and what your journey with gradeless has been?
Okay. Well, I started out of university coming in as a first year teacher in the same school district that whatever you're in Fairfax County Public Schools, and started teaching civics in a middle school there. And it was always an interesting thing, I thought, to be able to give just one little grade to a kid as a progress report. And so it kind of was just always odd to me. I know I had to do it. I was required to do certain things. I got yelled at because I didn't have enough of them. But what really got me is after a couple of years in the classroom, I ended up going into administration, and then eventually I went into the private sector in ed tech, and did that for many years, and saw there that we didn't use any kind of quantitative data whatsoever in regard to evaluating employees or anything like that. So when I returned back to the classroom, and I was actually teaching English language arts and social studies. I had a really hard time distinguishing and saying, in giving I was teaching 6th grade English language arts in a middle school. I had a really hard time telling a kid that they were a 71 or a C in writing when they're 11, 12, or 13 years old. It was quite difficult. And it just didn't feel right. I'd rather just give growth producing feedback. And at the same time all this was going on, we started using learning continuums. And I was like, wait a second, why don't we just use the learning continuum, because that's the roadmap for their where to go. So each kid had their own roadmap, and it just made life a lot easier, because just like Dave, your book, the tagline, as you know, is shifting the focus to student learning. That's exactly what happened. Is no more were we ever talking about grades. We were just talking about, well, I want to be able to move. I want to be able to move along in my details and show that I'm using figurative language, and I have in my writing here. So the argument, or not the argument, but the dialogue that I was having with kids was about learning, as opposed to what can I do to get my grade higher, or what can I do to get extra credit, which that wasn't about why I was there. Why I was there was for, helping the kids learn to write and become better citizens, all those kind of things, and be able to demonstrate that they had grown in their learning. And that's basically where it came along. And I just found that grades just kind of got in the way. It got in the way of learning, and once we got rid of them, all of a sudden the conversations changed. Conversations changed with the students, with the parents. Everything was about learning. And that's why I got into this. That's why I became a teacher.
Awesome. Thank you. And I have so many questions already. And I think one thing that you said stuck out to me. You talked about providing growth producing feedback. And I believe that it is a common experience for teachers who assign any kind of writing, for example, in classes, that they will spend all this time like giving the students feedback, and then giving it to the student only to learn later, whether it's through a final draft or whatever, that the kid never seemed to have even read or looked at the feedback. And so I'm wondering about how this platform is supportive of providing the kind of feedback that kids actually look at, or if that's part of the whole gradeless thing, or kind of your perspective on providing that feedback that kids are actually reading or listening to and using.
Well, the phrase growth producing feedback is not mine by any means. I learned it from a principal in Fairfax County Public Schools named Bruce Oliver. And I loved when he always talked about provide growth producing feedback, because it changed because A+, C, good, great, that is feedback. It's just not growth producing feedback. So, nor is it good feedback. So I was kind of that was very early in my teaching career that I started learning about growth producing feedback. And one of the things that I'm going to turn it back to what you just said was giving feedback to kids and having them not read it. Well, that goes to the nature of making sure that learning isn't being transactional. It's not me I give an assignment, the student gives it back. I provide feedback or a grade, and we move on. And that becomes an isolation silo element. Okay, you did your assignment on figurative language, or you did your assignment on forms of government. All the things that I teach in curriculum all interconnect in many different ways. And so what I found is that needed to keep going, so there could be we could show growth over time and make things link back to each other. And if you're not doing that, then you're really not looking at the metacognitive part of the student, seeing how they're learning, how they're growing, how things connect. How do things connect in the social studies or English classroom with mathematics or biology or whatever with PE or even band? How are all those kind of connections made? And I know you asked about a platform, and I'll get to that in just a second. It's just all of those kind of things were so important. And part of the reason why the platform you're talking about, it's got feedback, the one that I started building when I returned to the classroom, because I wanted to have conversations with kids about their learning. I didn't want it to be, I give you this, you give me this, that goes away. Let's go on to the next task that we have to check off on the standards list or a learning continuum. How do we make sure that all of this is interconnected and that we can go back and reflect upon where we are as learners? And so that's why that's kind of where gotLearning came from when I was teaching in the classroom and got frustrated with the LMS, because the LMS was set up as, I give you this, you give it back to me. I give the student, I give the student assignment or a test or whatever it may be. They give it back to me. I give a grade. Maybe I give some feedback. No matter what happened there, we move on. And that just wasn't right, because it reminded me of being in the private sector, that when I was working for an educational publisher, I had a graphic designer who worked with me. And if Shilpa brought something that wasn't very good, or let's say it wasn't publishable, I didn't just go, yeah, that's about a C+, let's run it, and then send out a big campaign. We went back and said, okay, let's look back at what the criteria is. What are we trying to do? How do we want people to react to this? What's our call to action? All those kind of things. And we'd go back and figure out how to make that better. And so I would give her growth producing feedback. She'd talk about it. We'd go back. And then we'd do these iteration cycles like we do in my classroom. And that was a very important thing to me as I went back in the classroom. I wanted to be able to have those iterative cycles until it got to where the producible, or what the producible piece that Shilpa was bringing in from the private sector was ready to be published. I was also wanted to do that in the classroom, where, okay, the student has shown mastery of these things, instead of, oh wow, they're a D+. Let's just move on. Well, then I'm not doing my job. I'm leaving them behind. And so how do I do that? And so that's where gotLearning came back in, is how do we capture all of that data in one kind of continuum, where you can continuously work with the student, even if it's past the due date. You can still work with them until it gets to a point that they've demonstrated that they understand the concept, or they can show that they have mastery of it. And that, so you can actually see growth over time. And once again, having all those things together, then you can reflect upon that and see, they can see how they've grown, where they've made mistakes, how they've grown from those mistakes. So that's basically was the impetus for building the very first version back in 2016 of gotLearning.
All right. So now, I know this is a question I've heard a lot, and I know you've heard it a lot as well. So you're talking about this. We have these LMSs that are already built where you can provide feedback. You can provide audio feedback. You can put images in there. You can do all of these things that you're talking about. Why not just use one of these existing LMSs to look at growth over time?
Well, one goes back to what I mentioned before earlier, and this is a great question, Dave, is the LMS is something, you assign a student, you give the student an assignment. They do that assignment and you give them feedback. Now, can they go back and change it and update it? Yes, they could, but are we moving on to the next thing? Are we moving on to the next unit? Are we moving on to the next lesson? Are we moving on? And generally, that's what the LMS is set up for. And the LMS, I started the K-12 group at Blackboard way back in the late 1990s, bringing the LMS into the K-12 space. And the LMS is a great tool, but it is transactional. It's that thing we were talking about before, giving them one thing and then getting it back. And they're definitely siloed. There's conversations, or not necessarily having a conversation. It's literally just that back and forth between you and that student at that one moment in time. Then you move to something else. And it's not easy to go back as a teacher or as a student, or as, whether you have a special ed teacher or a counselor that wants to go back and see how the student is going, or how they're growing over time, takes an enormous amount of time as you're going through an LMS, because every single assignment is siloed in, so it's easier for them to give a grade to or check off that it's been done. So that's basically why I did not like using just a regular traditional LMS, because it wasn't conversational. It wasn't me looking at the student from where I received them in August to where they were going in June, and being able to see their growth over time, see if they're continuously making the same mistakes, And if they are, whose fault is that? That's me. If I'm allowing them to make the same mistakes on the last 3 or 4 assignments, then, you know, they're not catching what I'm teaching. So I need to find out some other way of helping them, whether it's building scaffolding, reteaching, doing some small groups, doing mini lessons, whatever it may be. That allows me to go back and see all those kind of things. And that's the kind of tool that I needed to have. And so that's why I built this.
And I have a unique perspective on the development of this. And I know a lot of the conversations that we've had, you're asking me, how can I reduce your number of clicks? Right.
Yep.
And so, and I think as teachers, we can all kind of understand what you mean by that. Is just like, all right, I want to see the assignment. I have to click on the assignment list, go into this, then view feedback. And, so it's like 5 clicks to get to the thing that you want to see, then a couple clicks to back out to get to the next thing to compare it to. Then it's like 4 more clicks. And so a lot of the conversations we've had was, how can we kind of streamline this process? So maybe talk a little bit about that, and like streamlining the access and why that's so important.
Well, I think it's so important because we, as a teacher, and I actually, while I'm being the CEO of gotLearning, I'm still teaching one middle school English language arts class for 50 minutes, 3 to 3.5 times a week at a local school right up the road, because I want to be able to use this technology in there. And totally forgot the question there, Dave. Sorry, I went offline there for a second.
That's all right. So I'll repeat that question, but we also have a question from Arthur.
Yes, that's kind of threw me off there. I was like, wait a second, Arthur's not on here, but he is. Welcome, Arthur.
Well, no, people can post questions in the chat.
A listener question. It's our first one.
Yeah. All right. So my question was, why is streamlining the number of clicks so important?
Yeah. Okay, that's right. Because we only have so much time as a teacher. I mean, and we have so many things we have to make decisions about. And I found in the SIS and LMS that I was using when I went back in the classroom in 2015, I was clicking in the thousands of times a day. Just maybe it was 8 or 9 times just to get one thing done for all 110 of my students. And that was 8 times each for those. And I was sitting there going, wow, 8 times. I'm not a math teacher, but I know that's close to 1,000. How can we get that down? And I always talk to you, Dave. I always say, how can we get to 1? How can we always make things 1 click away from you without being able to have some kind of cool technology that read your retinas or something? How can we just get to 1 click, just so that it saves the amount of time for you and also for students to be able to get to what we're really about, which is, I want to be able to provide, as Michelle talked about earlier, I want to be able to provide growth producing feedback to kids on their learning and help lead them in the correct way. So I find that to be incredibly important, just because of the amount of time that we have. And a couple of the LMSs that I used, I felt like I got carpal tunnel syndrome just from using the scroll wheel, going down and finding it. And I was just searching for stuff all the time. It just kind of drove me nuts. So we kind of have this rule of trying to get to 1 click, just so that we can minimize the amount of time you are searching or going through an engineer design process. Should be a teacher design process, because they're the ones who are using it, so that you can get to what you're really good at, which is meeting the needs of each of your learners and giving them growth producing feedback.
All right. So now we'll get back to Arthur's question.
There we go.
And I know this is really important for a lot of teachers and administrators. Like, to what extent does Got Feedback interface with the online gradebooks?
Well, this comes down to, I'll tell you how I originally built it, and it's still that way today. It doesn't interface directly with a gradebook. I look at it as a gradebook as a place to put something summatively. It is a summative report for that moment in time. To get to that point, you need to look at all the data that's in front of you and see how the student has grown over time and where they are. So let's say that your traditional grade book is grades, and you have a rubric for that. Let's look at their whole body of evidence in one place and see how they've grown. And then you can make that determination. And then I would go over and put whatever grade I had to put in at the end of the, that I used to do one time at the end of the semester or quarter. And that's the same in a standards-based environment. If I could actually put a student and say that they're excelling here, they're developing here, they're meeting here, well, that's where they are. That's where they're doing it at that point. And so I didn't, in my non-grading areas, if you will, I didn't put meetings and excellings every week for kids. They knew where they were because we were talking about learning continuums. But when I needed to report out, I'd open up the grade book, look at the evidence, see where they are in their learning continuums, and say, wow, they're destroying where they're supposed to be in regard to meeting. So they're definitely excelling. So I'd put in excelling. What I'd really like to do is actually instead just take that conversation I have with kids in gotLearning and make that the evidence and say, hey, let me show you how the student how they've grown, or let me, better yet, let them show you where they came from and where they are now. And that's what I'd rather have in the grade book. So we really haven't ever interfaced with a grade book because that's reporting. It's not necessarily teaching and learning. I mean, this is a teaching and learning platform, and grade books are a reporting tool that that we usually quantitatively report out to.
Now, I would say another one of our previous guest, Mastery Transcript. This to me would be a great way to have supporting evidence for what you're putting on a Mastery Transcript.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially if you have, whether you're doing things like Portrait of a Graduate, which you'll hear a lot when you talk about Mastery of Transcript and all those kind of things, and being able to post that data in one place where not only can the students see it, but so can all of the teachers and even parents can actually see that learning evidence and their reflection on that learning evidence and why they believe that learning evidence is meeting a certain standard. I think it's a fantastic tool if you're looking to be able to show qualitative learning evidence to show where they are in regard to their learning. It's an absolutely phenomenal tool for that.
That kind of leads to one of my similar and related questions. Can like parents or administrators or case managers have access to that iterative feedback conversation between the student and the teacher? So that's my first.
Absolutely, 100%. That is so. It's so key here. Not to go to the African proverb that we've heard so much, but it does take a village.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and remember, LMS came from higher education, where the biology department does not talk to the humanities department, does not talk to the business department, and everything is completely siloed. And somehow when that transferred over in the late 1990s, it stayed that way. And you really don't have great tools where teachers, specialists, assistant instructors, whatever, teacher assistants, to your assistant principals and your principals, and even central office educators can be part of these conversations that teachers are having with students. And you can do that inside of gotLearning. And the great thing about it is Dave has had to go through this iterative process because he's been one of our very first users, is getting parents involved and being able to have parents see the conversations that go along here. So parents can also go in and see, and we have it set up right now where the teacher gets to decide what they share with the parents. So you can turn on family view if you want, so that you want to be able to share certain things. So that, I usually do it in my classroom, I usually do it with a highlight reel at the, 2 weeks before a parent teacher conference or whatever it may be. I'll have the students create a highlight reel where they explain to their parents how they're doing. And what we do is we sit down, the students come to our conferences, and the students present, hey, this is what I am. I recorded this video. Let me show you what I'm doing. This is what I'm trying to convey through this video. So it's a great kind of tool to be able to do those things.
Awesome. And then the other related question was, it doesn't interface with like a grade book, but so let's say my school has adopted Canvas or Schoology or whatever. Is Got Feedback meant to be used like in conjunction with an existing LMS, or is it something that's completely separate from the adopted LMS?
The answer to that, to both of those, is yes.
Okay.
And Dave, you don't mind if I throw you out here on this one, do you?
No, not at all.
Dave uses his school does use Canvas, and they also use Got Feedback. But how Dave uses it, Dave is required to use Canvas and Dave, you can jump in at any time. Dave is required to use Canvas as like his class homepage, where he has things listed and all those kind of things. But from inside there, you can easily get to the conversations and Got Feedback.
So what happens, anything that you set up as an assignment has like a unique ID. So I just paste hot links into my assignment. So instead of them hitting the submit button, they hit that link, and it'll bring them right to Got Feedback, right to the exact conversation that I want them putting that artifact in.
And what happens from there, Michelle, is that, let's say that's a rough draft, or like for Dave, it's an early lab report. You then have a conversation about it. And it's a conversation that has a beginning, and it just goes on infinitely. And you can have multimodal kind of things, whether it's audio, video, scan documents in, text, whatever you want to do, and have that conversation go through there. And then what's great about that is a lot of those conversations that we have are usually done through email, or they're done through a chat board or something like that don't stay inside the student record. That is incredible formative assessment. And that's when I want to go back and take a deep dive on a student. I like to go back and see what were kind of questions they were asking. Maybe what kind of questions were they asking each other? Because you can also do kind of groups and everything in there. You get to choose and see what's inside those conversations. That doesn't occur in a transactional system. It doesn't occur in that little speed grader that happens in the upper right-hand corner of Canvas. So
yeah, so you're not just like talking about giving feedback anymore. This is a whole pedagogical shift.
Yeah, well, yes, it matches. It matches a teaching way of being able to meet the needs of each of your diverse learners. One of the big things that really got me was when I started teaching it in 2015. Is I was teaching at the International School Bangkok, which is an American-style high school, but with 33% Americans, 33% Thai, and 34% from all around the world. So I had some kids coming in, English is their fourth or fifth language, reading at a second grade level, some reading at a 10th grade level, and I'm teaching sixth grade. And if I just taught straight sixth grade, I'm missing a ton of kids. I have some kids who I said 10th grade because that's where our learning continuum stopped because of IB. This one student probably could have just gone straight to university in sixth grade. We've all had students like that. She was one of them. But how do you meet their needs and also meet the students that are at second, third grade level? And, that one size fits all just doesn't work. And it doesn't have to be an international school with lots of people speaking different languages and different cultures. Even in just a traditional American school that doesn't have a lot of transiency or have a lot of different languages, that's the same way. Kids are at different levels at all times. And I needed something that, I have multiple kids that their most recent narrative in my classroom right now was supposed to be completed by the end of December. But I have 5 kids that their writing is not publishable yet because they haven't demonstrated what they need to do to be publishable. We both haven't agreed on that. So we're continuing on that together in Got Feedback while we're also working on other things. And we can do that. It reminds me to go back in the classroom and talk to them about it. We can have the conversations online and all those kind of things. So it's a very unique tool in regard to allowing you to meet the needs of all your diverse learners.
So now, with that, we always hear about how timely feedback is important, right? And so when you're giving growth producing feedback, we're really talking about narrative descriptive feedback, right? And to get that to 100 students in a timely fashion is very challenging, right? So why don't you talk about some of the tools that you're using to assist in that?
Okay, well, first is generative. One of the easiest ones to talk about is generative AI. We have incorporated our AI tool, which we originally called Got Feedback Lite, into Got Feedback. And what's great about that is you can actually set up and keep your own prompts about your assignments. We have a prompt manager that allows you to go in and get drop down and see feedback about whatever you want from whatever prompt you had. So if a student has a Google Doc or has a PDF or a Word doc, you can actually get feedback from that. But you can also do one other thing, which was really cool. And we did this last April, and it's really changed the way things go in my classroom, is being able to have student-facing feedback, where the student actually chooses your prompt and gets feedback on their document. And it actually keeps what was presented to them inside of Got Feedback. So you can see, one, how many times did they do it, how many times did they ask for feedback and get AI feedback, but also what changes did they make? How have they incorporated that? Was the feedback correct? Was their understanding of the feedback, did that transfer into them into their learning? So those are two different ways that we make it a little bit easier and a little bit more timely. And what was cool is the very first time, this is sixth graders, we turned it on Thursday, and I taught them about it on Friday. And it was really interesting to see them go back and do writing. And I remember one girl actually did it. She went back and she'd write for about, 2 paragraphs and then go get feedback. And then she'd write some more and then go get more feedback. And she did that 8 times. And it was interesting to see, not because the AI was actually giving good feedback, but it was meeting her need on a Saturday afternoon, which I was not going to be doing, or on a Sunday. But she was able to get that when she needed and when she wanted that. And I was able to go back and see all the times that she did that and what feedback was provided, and jump in if there's something that is a little bit outside of or was incorrect, or I hadn't taught her about before, or any questions that she had. So it's kind of a neat way of doing that. Those are the kind of things you were talking about, Dave?
Yeah, I was talking about that. And then I don't know if you're willing to share what you're currently working on.
Yeah, I will. I'll definitely jump in that, because that's super exciting. Because Michelle, I don't know if you know much about what we're also working on. We just recently, one of the cool things that we found is we are capturing all of this qualitative learning evidence. Lots of documents, lots of lab reports, essays, written assignments, reflections, history thing, whatever it may be, essays, and we're able to see growth over time, because it's usually in this long conversation. So you're able to see that growth over time. What we thought, and we've been talking about for a while, is like, wouldn't it be cool if we could have AI do that, and have AI with some natural language processing be able to do that? And then not only that, what about taking that and looking at it at the class level and seeing my whole class, and be able to get information very, very fast. Dave said earlier, I don't know what number you used, something over 100. You had 120 pieces of writing, and you wanted to get feedback on. Well, maybe you didn't necessarily want to give, because I can't give feedback on every single thing my kids write, but maybe I wanted to see where they were. And maybe we were working on narrative structures, and I had all 120 of my kids that day write it, narrative structure, and they each wrote 2 to 3 pages. 360 pages to read. I'm not going to read that. I don't even get that in my own books on an average night by any means. So what if I had a tool that could actually read all of that from across my classes and give me analysis on that, and even give teaching points, and maybe even pull out different things? And that, what I just described there, is something that we're calling Learning Pulse, which we've been building for the past 6 months, and are piloting in schools actually around the world now, piloting in a few schools around the world. And so it's a very new technology, but it is incredibly helpful in regard to the labor hours it takes for us to look at the whole entire corpus of all of our students' work. And why are we doing this? Well, we could have gone the route where, we did go the route where we did have got feedback, which you put a document in and it gave feedback. And that was transactional. And that's great. But once we realized we built that over a weekend, we realized that a lot of people were going to build this because we did it in a weekend. If we could do it in a weekend, then there are other people that could do it in a weekend or a week or two later. And there have been a lot of those AI companies that are out there that are wrappers are doing that. But what could we do to really help teachers understand teachers, not only teachers, but also administrators, to be able to understand where their schools are at that moment in time? That's what we're working on right now. So does that kind of give a good layout of that, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I've got a question.
Sure.
Not to get too much in the weeds on this, but I know that students and parents are increasingly aware of and concerned about like data privacy.
Sure.
And so what is built in or inherent in this system that provides protection of student data as it's reading and analyzing these submissions?
Well, one of the great things is we're a member of NVIDIA's startup program called Inception, the Inception program for startups. And so we've been working with them for almost over a year and a half now, and they've helped given us a lot of guidance on how to do these kind of things. And so the way we built Learning Pulse is that we actually do not send any data at all to Meta or to Google or to OpenAI or to Claude. The only data goes from the school into Learning Pulse and back. And so we have our LLM in its own walled garden that no data is shared outside of that at all. So there's, just like if you were to send up your data to your SIS company, it's something that is highly protected. Things are, they're, what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm sorry. They're, all the different things that you can do from protecting it on AWS and encryption, having encryption at rest or even in transit. All of those things we've looked in there because we know somewhere along the line, California or Texas or New York or Illinois is going to turn around and say, you can no longer send data to student data, especially PII, PII data, to these big frontier companies like Claude and Meta and Google. Because if you really look at COPA and FERPA, we say we're not sharing this, but so many companies are. And so we've decided to go ahead and take it another route and keep everything very inside the gotLearning and Learning Pulse walled garden. And hopefully I didn't go too far in the weeds there.
Not for me.
So we're going to be mindful of time. Is there any final thoughts or anything you'd like the audience to know?
One is, especially since I'm talking to the gradeless group, the Grow Beyond Grades group, who are near and dear to my heart because of how they think and how they feel about grades. That means they're really thinking about the individual learner, and they're really thinking about the growth of each learner. and really meeting the needs of all learners and not limiting them, and I would say keep doing what you're doing. That's one thing. If you're looking for a tool that you want to know your students and you want your students to know themselves as learners, take a look at gotLearning. Give me a call. Give a teacher a call. Ask one of your colleagues that's using it. Does it make teaching really a lot easier? If you're meeting the needs of every single kid, no, it doesn't. I mean, we want it to. We want it to make it super, super easy, and we're trying to. But if you're trying to meet every need of you're trying to meet the needs of all of your students, it does take a lot of work. But the more you do it, the better you get at it, and the more rewarding it is. As that first jump you took going into Gradeless, where you're like, oh my gosh, lightning didn't strike me, and this is really cool, and it really is changing things. That's the same when you start jumping away from a traditional LMS to take a look at it and meet the needs of each of your kids is something really special. So even if you do use gotLearning or you don't, keep being Gradeless. I think that's a fantastic thing for your kids. So that's basically all I'd have to say.
I'm going to hop on one of the things that you said. Like, nothing that we do will ever make teaching easier. It just shifts where we have to spend our time. And we can focus on some of the things that are more important. So you had said people can reach out to you. Where can they find you?
First off, you can hit me at gotLearning on Blue Sky, which I know a lot of people are out there as well. We're also at Growth Over Time on Twitter, and also on LinkedIn and Facebook under gotLearning. If you just find a quick search there, or if you're super interested in what I was talking about in regard to Learning Pulse, definitely drop me an email, mike@gotlearning.com. We're looking for innovative teachers, administrators, educators who really want to be able to see where their students are at moments in time at large scale. And do some really cool things. I'd love to show it to you and get your feedback. So please give me a contact there as well at mike@gotlearning.com.
All right, Michelle, any final thoughts?
No, that was a great, very informative conversation.
All right, Mike, thank you for joining us. And once again, thank you to all of our sponsors. Join us next time. I believe we're going to have Dr. Matthew Woods joining us next time. So thank you and have a good night.
Yes.
Thank you much.
No.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Grow Beyond Grades. You can find more great content on our website, growbeyondgrades.org, on Twitter at GBGEDU, or on Facebook at Grow Beyond Grades. If you enjoy this content, please consider supporting our efforts by becoming a member. Go to patreon.com/gradeless and choose your level of support. We hope you'll join us for the next installment of Grow Beyond Grades.